Welcome to the Olentangy Local Schools Board of Education regular meeting. That is really loud. Today is October 5th, 2017. It is 6 p.m. We're in the Olentangy Administrative Offices Berlin Room. Mrs. Hatfield, can you call the roll, please?
Absolutely. Mrs. Fiesel?
Here.
Mr. King?
Here.
Mr. O'Brien?
Here.
Mrs. Patrick? Here. And Mr. Bartz?
Here. If you'd please all join us, stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight on our agenda, we do have one addendum that was added, which is a superintendent action item on the separate page that you have, item C1. So with that, if I can get a motion to approve the agenda, please.
So moved. I'll second.
Any comments? The roll, please.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
And Mr. Bartz?
Yes, we're going to move right into our presentations. Both of them are Mr. Gordon is presenting tonight. First one is on the 2017 Permanent Improvement Projects Update. That's what I have, unless that changed.
That did change, actually, one tonight is permanent improvements update and the energy update.
Yeah, I'll do that second. Yeah, you're good. I got you.
Scared me there for a second. Prepared?
Just one page, Jeff?
Yes. Back in December of 16, what we expected to be our permanent improvement expenditures for this year. And the report tonight is just coming back and reviewing what we said we would spend versus what we actually spent out of this budget. As you know, when we have the needs, we try to expend the funds. When we don't and can return some back to the budget, we will do that with our PI. So having said that, just a quick summary here, and I'm not going to hit every line, I'll just hit the high points here. One thing that is different on here that we'll start doing going forward, and we'll do in December as well, when we present next year's, is the growth on the buses.
Yeah.
Previously, we've not included that, and we'll start including those items that were listed out on the bond sheet that when we went out for levy, we had specific items like some roofing and buses listed. We'll start including those in this report so we can get a picture of everything that was on there, which I think will help for our planning purposes going forward. So I added the buses on here for growth because that was the expenditure that we did have out of that bond as well. So we had school bus replacements plus the growth. The membrane roofing at OHS and SMS, we didn't spend that whole budget that was allocated there. And this was another item that was designated on that bond for the Shanahan and Olentangy High School roofs. So you will continue to see that carried forward year after year as we continue to do repairs on those older roofs. And since that money was designated for that purpose, we'll keep it on there until those go through and we meet the needs of that money. We've talked a little bit before, I think you've been updated through the year, the OOHS tennis court replacement movement. We were not able to get things through the county that we needed to get that done this summer. And because of spring and fall tennis, we couldn't push it into the fall to get that done. So once we didn't make the summer deadline for that, it is pushed to next summer, and we still plan to do that. As part of that package, because we get better pricing when we do things together like this, the two tracks that we had included with that tennis court bid, because the same company that does the tracks does the tennis courts. So we also took a hard look at those and decided to carry those forward a year as well, so we could get that better pricing on that. So we're going to get through another year with the tracks at Orange Meadow and Shanahan to try to get that pricing. Then with any tracks we do next year, we'll end up having a bigger package and hopefully get even better pricing on it, doing the whole package. So we'll carry that forward. The items in yellow
are actually the items where we went a little bit over budget outside of most of these, what I call my buckets. And those are the areas and some of the highlights on why we ended up there. Under the electrical, we had to replace the whole clock system in an elementary, as well as when we moved the bus loop at the back of Olentangy High School. The way the parking lot lights are set up and the buses loop around, the far side of the bus actually blocks the light from the poles in that parking lot. So this time of year when the weather starts or days start getting shorter, and then through the winter, the back side of that loop where the kids are walking around to come to the building doesn't have a lot of lights. We ran a couple light poles back there. So those were just a couple items under the electrical that kind of drove that up higher than what we might have seen otherwise. The exterior finishes is another one that ended up a little higher, and that's an area that discussed with the Facilities Committee last night. The interior and exterior finishes, as we set these budgets up and we start working through developing a history of where our needs are, that's a couple lines that we're probably going to steal from some other lines and increase those amounts. We're seeing a lot of things, especially our older buildings, where we're having exterior doors or exterior windows that are starting to fail and really go at a little quicker rate and a little higher cost than what we've probably put into these buckets. So you'll see in December we'll probably tweak these buckets up a little bit to try to account for more of those changes, like our wooden windows at Olentangy High School, and then going forward we have a lot of those pillow windows. Well, after the 25 years that we're at with those buildings, we're starting to see those need to be replaced, as well as our exterior metal doors and some of the frames around them rusting out or getting water in the top in areas like a gymnasium. We have had a problem at Orange Middle, Olentangy High School. Most of those exterior doors this year we've had to do some kind of work to get those through and go. So those are areas, again, I'm only spending time on them because we'll see that increase and ratchet up as our buildings age. That's one that you'll see. Safety and security, as well as that contingency, is another item that was a big ticket item that normally, if we expected it to be quite as high of a cost, would have been itemized up top, but we changed out or are in the process of changing out the PA system at Shanahan Middle School, which is about a $48,000 ticket. Normally, we would just change out the head end, which might be a $10,000 to $15,000 price tag in most of our buildings, but Shanahan has the oldest speaker systems, so we didn't only have to change out the head end there. We found we're having a lot of problems with wiring above the ceilings as well as the speakers in the rooms. So that is a complete change out at Shanahan that we wouldn't expect to do at our buildings that are newer, that are the 10 to 20 years old. If we have to do repairs, we'd really be looking most likely at a head end, changing the electronic equipment, not necessarily all the wiring and speakers like we found we needed to do at Shanahan. And that's important. We had that under contingency as well as safety and security, because the PA, not just to get announcements out to the students, but part of our safety plan is the Alice training, and that involves heavily that PA system and being able to reach the building all at once. So that's why we started really having some major issues. We moved that up and just bit the bullet to do it now. So those are the major categories. The only other thing I wanted to mention was the asphalt, which on your handout didn't come out as light blue as it did on the screens, because that was included in items that we want to carry forward to next year. And that is the tracks and the tennis courts. I'd mentioned about bringing that up next year to go ahead and do those, as well as there is a little bit of a carryover in asphalt. And you're aware that the budget under asphalt included the carryover last year for the handicap accessibility on the pathways, which you've probably seen as you've gone into the buildings at Orange and Olentangy High School. We've also started this year, based on needs, again, being a little bit of a victim of our success, we have a lot of special needs children that are starting to really use our playgrounds. And we have 2 or 3 buildings where we've had some of those students that have gone from preschool into kindergarten. And one of the things we're trying to do is add a little more handicap accessibility for them. And we started this year as an extension. The playground surface falls under asphalt and concrete. So when we budget for those repairs, those are done under that line. We have added are in the process of adding this month soft surface to 3 of our playgrounds that will allow handicap accessibility to a bank of swings on each playground. That way we'll put a swing in that a wheelchair could roll right up on the swing and be able to have access there. And our plan is to do that, roll that out to all the playgrounds But this year we have 3 where we've been trying to work with the parents, and they've been very patient with us in finding a solution, kind of giving another option there as well. Each playground currently has pads that are around the big play structure, but that's the only access they really have. So this will give some ability to get on the swing and swing with some of the other students and do that. So, so my plan was to take the remaining money here in the asphalt and bring that forward and do continue that playground, do a handful next year, and try to wrap up the rest of the elementaries the following year as part of our asphalt bids and increase the handicap accessibility. And we were able this year, the way we're on asphalt, we went out early, went out in February, and we had a larger bid than we've had probably ever in the district outside of a new building. So we got really good pricing on our asphalt this year because of the bulk, and going out in February, we beat a lot of other districts in large bids, so people were hungry to make sure they had secured work for the summer, which went to our benefit. So we actually were able to do all of our alternates this year, and take a big step forward in getting caught up with some of the asphalt. So that is it for my report. For questions?
Yeah. I have a question on the orange tennis courts. Are we still going to be able to move them into the location we thought, or do we have to change the location because of?
No, I think we're going to be able to move them into the location. It's proving out some of the storm drainage was the concern, and getting that in and getting that through the county quick enough to get permits and get that started in the summers where we ran into. We've had the ability at times, as we did with our getting this building ready and with the preschool, of getting things and getting through those approvals. But with those calculations, we tried to use orange middle schools, which were quite a while ago, and the county wanted us to reprove out some of those calculations with the additional storm drainage we had, instead of just using calculations from before, which held us up, and then getting it done in time.
Okay.
And while we're on that, there still will be a need, even though we open Berlin next year, there still is, Orange has the least parking of any of our high schools, and will continue to have, so there still is a need to do that, even with Berlin opening, just to emphasize that. Orange will not lose enough students that would alleviate the parking
All
needs
their
over
parking.
there.
So you're roughly 850 under, and then 730 of it you want to carry over. So you're left with about 120. What happens to the 120?
That rolls forward into, I don't want to say we lose that, though. That goes to future PI years down the road outside of our 5-year forecast. The budget numbers that we use, that we looked at in December for the 5 years, and the numbers we'll use this year are numbers that were set by Brian and now Emily on what was available, and we set that based on the PI. So that money goes into future to help get us further down the road. So as Emily's looking at where our PI is at in 5 years, what we've been able to carry forward from years where we didn't use it all, or any bond money that might come available for whatever reason, like we did last time, going through that evaluation. So that's not something I'm saying, okay, now we're going to use it next year, or it's going to increase somewhere. It just goes into future to help us extend out, much like we would do with general fund that returns back in and goes into future years, to try to string out the PI for future years.
So I guess, is there a capacity of how much work we can get done over the summer? And even though we planned for, say, 3.9, we just couldn't get it all done, and maybe we should just plan for less every summer?
It wasn't, no, I don't think that was, doing the track and the, or the tennis court and that parking lot was a little bit different of an animal, getting started earlier, and we've already started that process for now. That just happened to be one that takes longer, that's more into what we'd see in a building or renovations. And this has been with Shanahan, and we did this building, and just a lot of projects we had coming through and going through permitting as well. So being that the majority of the budget is when you look at it, is buying buses and the asphalt, 2 big things that are done through bids. The rest of it are smaller projects. I would say no, that it's just this year that one project was an oddity. Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
So with that, let's go to the board's president report. Very simple. I noticed in the last couple of weeks that a lot of our committees are meeting, both our board and superintendent committees. Finance and audit, facilities, we have policy next week. But I just wanted to say thanks to our community volunteers for their service on those committees. It's vital and important, and we appreciate it. So any other board members want to share anything during what's listed as my time? If not, we're going to move on. Mr. Rafe, Superintendent's Report, please.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here. Just to start off, as usual, with some good things. Our Hats for Houston fundraiser that was organized, started by the students at Orange Middle School, spread district-wide, raised over $25,000. It's just amazing, the generosity of people in the district. And we're doing, actually, at the Orange Olentangy football game tomorrow night, a check presentation to the Red Cross in between the first and second quarters. So looking forward to that. We have another student who's organizing. You know, a lot of the schools got hit hard, so we have a student at Orange High who is organizing a book drive for people to donate any books they may have. So we're examining all of our collections to see what we can add to that book drive. I am eagerly looking forward to getting rid of some of the boxes of books my teacher wife has compiled over the years. So I thank Bear Fuller for organizing that. Been getting a lot of questions on this, and I just want to make the community aware that the Berlin High School online apparel store is now open, and there is a link available on the Berlin High School website, so people can get out in front of getting all that gear. We do have all of the logos that we're currently using trademarked through our agreement with Varsity
Read my
Brand. So,
mind. Good.
Thank you.
yes, sir. Monday we had the. God, how many golf outings is this? It's
Oh, gosh.
quite a few. I can't recall, but we had a great turnout as usual. It was just a beautiful day for the third year in a row. I don't know what the coincidence of 3 years in a row of beautiful weather and significance of that, but it just was a good event, and the good guys
Who won,
won.
Mr. Rafe? Who won this
The
year?
good guys won.
Oh, it was your team.
Mr.
right?
Mr. O'Brien's team finished second. Mr. King hit a long putt, I don't know, 30-foot putt or something, so he won a prize. So it was a good day all around.
Yep.
So a lot of fun. We did have our meeting today with Chris Willard, the ODE Director of Accountability and Continuous Improvement. It was a good meeting. Chris is a district resident. He is keenly aware of the difficulties of the reporting system, the confusion that's being caused throughout the state. He's trying, I would say, very hard to be supportive of what the legislator wants, what the legislators ask of ODE, what the communities want, but it's, you know, there's just a lot of difficulty in explaining this. As I watched Dr. Way, our statistician, who is arguably the smartest person I know, I was watching his facial expressions during the explanation, and he seemed to be struggling to follow some of the explanation, which really caused me concern. Mrs. Davis sat in our meeting and took copious notes for the entire meeting and came out, and I asked her what she was going to report, and she said, "I have no idea," unfortunately. But I will, and Jeanette, I'm really proud of Jeanette. She came in guns a-blazing and asked some really good, tough questions, so much so that she got herself put on a committee.
Welcome to the club. And what committee is that?
So I'm going to ask Jack and Jeanette to come up and
Good.
give a couple of their takeaways, since this is their area of emphasis.
Do you know the name of the committee, Julia asked? Something to
I don't even know what I'm volunteering
inform future report card creation.
Okay.
So a couple of takeaways that I had. First, Roger, you had asked a question at the last meeting of, did the value-added measure change from the old tests to the new tests? The answer was very long, and I think the answer is that not really. Certainly the inputs changed when the test changed, and that might have caused some other small changes, but the general philosophy of value-added did not change. So I don't know how much that helps you, but I made sure to ask that question.
Well, I had, the way that this part of this meeting just started with people saying, "I don't know," and using the term keenly aware, I had lowered expectations.
Well, fair enough. One thing that Chris did provide for us, which was helpful, He provided our disaggregated data from last year and then this year, because what we've seen on the report card is a 2-year average. So he looked at just the most recent data, and from that, he could tell us that if we were only being measured on 1 year from the most recent year, we would be a C, which is meets expectations. But because it's a 2-year average, and we know we had the
Lowest F.
terrible data 2 years ago, that's, as his words, that's an anchor that's going to weigh us down for a while. So that's encouraging. The other thing is that we spent a lot of time talking about what value added means for high achieving students. And the way, and I said this to him, I said, this is how I'm going to describe it. And he had somewhat of an objection, but agreed that conceptually it's right. And what that is our high achieving students are still high achieving, they're just not achieving highly enough. So if you look at the tests, there's 5 levels of performance, advanced being the highest level that a student can score. Our students who last year scored advanced, this year are still scoring advanced, but they're not scoring high enough within the advanced range in order to justify a year's worth of growth. So we asked him for some concrete examples of how we can understand how that could possibly be. He's asked for some clearer questions through email, which we will follow up and send to him, and he said he would have to provide that data to some of his statisticians to try and get us something that will help us a little more. So that was very nice of him to at least entertain the thought. But we spent 90 minutes talking about this. He took every question, came prepared. I mean, was not here begrudgingly at all. I do have a great amount of respect for him for coming for 2 years in a row and doing what he can. And like Mark said, he is certainly an enforcer in some regard of the legislature and the state board, which are 2 different entities that don't always see eye to eye. So that's where we are. Did I miss any keen points there?
I don't think so. I think the only other question that Julie, you had asked last week was what would our overall grade have been on the report card? If they gave an overall grade, we would have been a B this year. I calculated it last week. So.
Okay, thanks. When you say that our high achieving students just aren't achieving high enough,
Yes.
it's my understanding that when you get the results, like there's no name that says John Doe, right? It's just like an aggregate of test scores, right?
Correct.
But can they tell, okay, these kids last year were high achievers. Can they tell that those kids are still high achievers this year? Like, how do they, like, is there a code that they're given for kids or an EMIS number?
They definitely identify the individual scores for each individual student, but when they calculate value added, they calculate it in an aggregate in a subgroup. So what they would tell you is there is no value added score for an individual kid. There's only a score for groups of kids. So they'll take each of your individual scores, and we know what they all are, and then they lump them together and they run the equation and figure out if you all grew or not. So some of you theoretically may have grown, some of you may not have grown. If one of you didn't grow so much and the others only grew a little, the whole subgroup would be a negative growth because there is a weight factor per each individual student.
But
I don't know if I'm helping.
if you were in the high achieving group last year, are you still considered in the high achieving group this year, or is
Yes.
that a new group? Okay.
Yes,
Well, those are students identified gifted, not necessarily high.
primarily.
Oh,
Yeah.
right,
Primarily.
yeah.
You don't have to, we have plenty of kids who score advanced that aren't identified gifted.
And one of the things he talked about was the importance of the gifted measure and gifted value added and the gift, not so much the gifted indicator, we didn't get into that as much, but we did discuss the fact that we have so many gifted students and so little state funding, and we're being compared with other districts who might have a much different ratio of gifted intervention specialists to gifted students. We're only able to serve a small percentage of our identified gifted students, but even if they're not being served, they are calculated in that gifted value added group. The other thing I wanted to mention was that he did share a number of coming changes to the report card next year in value added and in other aspects of the report card. much of which was new to us.
And was this done legislatively? Because I don't think so.
It's in the ESSA proposal, so it hasn't been approved by the federal government yet, but that there's
Oh, it's
proposals
in
that
the
they're
ESSA.
changing to.
So we're going to drop the social studies test at
Yeah,
So-
fourth
yeah.
grade, is it fourth grade social studies?
Fourth and sixth.
Yeah.
Fourth and sixth. So the all-test value-added grade next year will be a different ball of wax than this
Yeah.
year, because social studies won't be included.
a test, by the way, that we traditionally perform very well on.
They're also going to take out, as you know, Julie, with the high school graduation requirements, you have to earn points on high school end of course tests. The students who take a test a second time, because maybe they got a 1 or a 2 out of 5, they want to go back and try and get a 3.
Yeah.
Those students, if they're retaking the test, are going to get pulled out of our passage rate. Only their first attempt is going to count now for our report card,
So that'll bring it down.
potentially.
We don't, I mean, I don't know that it'll affect our overall indicator that much as far as passage rate, but then there's gonna be an additional indicator, the retake indicator, that's gonna look at, of the kids who are retaking the test, what % of those kids are becoming proficient, and they still don't know what % they're gonna be looking for as far as a second time testing. It's not gonna be the 80% that's expected the first time for every other test, but they don't know what that's gonna be.
On the
yet.
second time, it should be 80%, I would think. You know, that's the time you would think it would be 80%. You're taking it again.
I think they said last year, if they used, last year's state data was 30%. was
State data.
The state did as far as retakes becoming proficient, so, but that'll be a new indicator.
The other change to the report card is with the graduation rate. Any student with an IEP who is exempted in any capacity from end of course test because of their disability will be removed from our numerator in calculating graduation rate. So those students who have a disability that's recorded, that their IEP team decides they should not be held accountable to this test because, the math test, because of their math disability. They can still be exempted and they can graduate, but we will be penalized in our graduation rate. They will count as a non-graduate in our graduation rate, which is interesting, to say the least.
Someone, no.
I have one. So last week's board meeting, you presented a theory of how value added was calculated. Was that theory validated or?
We did not show him, we ended up not showing him the exact model, but yes, I think in conversation with him, absolutely. And even more so, he brought some statistics correlating value added with performance index, which for both of our careers has always been a no-no, that performance index is achievement, value added is growth. They are two separate measures. There should not be a correlation. He brought some correlations that he sees and kind of strengthened some of the things that we've always been assuming but have been told aren't really
Some districts have a
true.
decrease in their performance index and they have an A in growth.
For 2 years in a row. He didn't have a good answer for that one.
I can follow.
Though it was we asked him a question about another district, but a district whose PI went down 2 years in a row, but they got an A in growth each of those 2 years. We contend that it's illogical.
Question, Roger?
Yeah, please.
I'd like to return to the committee. Could you tell us more about the committee? I'm pleased to hear that we're going to have good representation on this committee. Is this an existing or new committee?
It's an existing committee. Jessica Mamias, who was assistant principal at Orange High School, had served on it in the past. So he had mentioned, since she is no longer at Olentangy, that it would be good to have Olentangy representation. So they do talk a lot about, the different measures of the state report card. If there is any leeway as far as, what the state board can impact as far as how it's being implemented based on state law. They kind of go through all of those things as well. That's really all that I know about it right now.
Is it, approximately, is it a large committee number-wise, or is it more compact?
That I'm not sure.
How about influence? And is it touching all of the aspects of the report card? Does it truly have some impact, the committee?
I don't know. I
It's a
mean, I
loaded
think that,
question.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think
It
that's
could,
like
it could.
law.
But any changes have to be then enacted by the state legislature, so they can make recommendations.
Understand.
Right.
I understand that.
Like the
but
assessment
I
committee
just-
recommended the elimination of the science and the social studies tests, and the ultimate decision was just to eliminate the social studies tests. There was a similar committee that looked at that, and the state superintendent chose not to.
Put that one forward.
Well, I know, I
use
can
all of
understand
those,
that
so.
it's not, you're not a governing body, you're a recommending body. I just hope that there's,
It-
that
it
they
should
listen to
have
what you have to say.
It should have some weight,
Okay, good.
hopefully.
Does Mr. Willard believe that this is an accurate representation of Olentangy's performance? How this formulaic process works out?
We asked that a couple different ways, and I would say yes and no. And
You're doing a great job of
I'm telling you what I
On
heard.
both sides.
I'm sorry.
He should run for office or something.
First, one of the things I asked him was, I said, if he had the authority, is there aspects of the report card that he would change, that he thinks are less than fair and less than perfect? He said unequivocally yes. He did not necessarily share what those were with us,
No, that would
and he
expect.
still contended that the data is something that we should look at and use, that it's important that the department is using this data to try to help students. So that's where I'm at.
Do you think the data that you have, you can use it to help students?
Not yet, no.
Here in Olentangy, no. Okay.
But some of the things we discussed with him that we wanted to email, that he's going to try and maybe get us, I think. It comes back to, in large part, item analysis. On the old tests, they would release an item analysis that would allow us to look at what did the test say, how did these students do versus those students, how might a teacher have taught this differently that got these answers. They don't release those now. They release a much different version, higher level, less items. And the reason is because they have to pay for the items, so once you release them, you can't use them again. So it is a cost savings, I think. I mean, pretty directly.
I mean, at the end of the accountability system is what it is. We know the game, the rules of the game, and we're going to work to make program improvements to get the high scores possible.
I'm sorry, but the other, and that's correct, is we do want all A's, but one of the things that Jeanette brought up with him was that the value-added measure by design means that every district, Jeanette's point is that every district should be able to get all A's. You should set an attainable benchmark, and people
Good
should
point.
be able to work to reach that. With value-added, it is impossible for every district in the state to get A's, all A's. There have to be losers in order for there to be winners.
Right, because of your comparisons,
Right.
right?
Yeah, so we said it's a comparative measure,
Yeah.
so could everyone be a C? Sure.
Yes.
It statistically isn't ever going to happen, so there are going to be A's, so there are going to be F's. And I just tried to ask him, so how does that portray our progress and growth to the public?
Right.
Because it doesn't.
So ODE is going to issue participation medals for every district in the state, right? Here's your participation medal. Thank you for coming to our state report card. Have a nice day. I mean,
Well, and it's why we've developed a quality profile and other things to talk about where we are
right, well,
exceeding far beyond
which is
state-
appreciated.
State testing and so much more that goes into the whole experience of being in our schools and so on. You know, the 10,000 people are going to show up at Olentangy tomorrow to watch Orange and Olentangy play football and have an incredible experience as part of our school district isn't on a state report card. The athletic or the arts program isn't on the report card. The music program is not on the report card. So, there's just so many more things we do well here that we're proud of that we're going to continue to do. So.
Well, I'll speak. Everyone else, we appreciate the fight. You're swimming, unfortunately, many days on this, you're swimming against a current as opposed to trying to get across it and to the other side. And, all you can do or help us is what else can we do to help you? I'm frustrated by it, as others are.
Well, and the thing is, I
But
talk to staff about it.
it's not your fault.
Well, we appreciate that, but also, we don't want anybody to think or hear that we're trying to make excuses, because our teachers genuinely are working very, very hard to do their best possible job to facilitate maximum learning for every student. And every time I talk in a staff meeting, I try to reassure them. I see how hard they're working each and every day, and something I said to Mr. Willard is that's where it gets disheartening. Krista mentions just walking up after walking out of that meeting. That's why she got out of education 18 years ago. Just because she saw that
Testing culture.
And, the hard part that we, as Jeanette mentioned to Mr. Willard also today, is that, it's really difficult to explain to our teachers how we could for 13 years have great growth, all this great achievement, and then all of a sudden, not. And we had growth with the PARC test, the first go around, the more rigorous test, so, okay. Again, we think we're on the right path, we're gonna continue on that path.
But we'll still have an anchor.
Yes. Yeah, we're dragging a boat anchor. Yep, you bet.
Even if you take an anchor, it'd be nice to know what you're trying to work on. That's the issue.
Yeah, we don't understand the playing field. They're asking for improvement in a playing field we have no way of knowing how to get to there, so, okay.
Well,
I have
thank you.
I have great faith that our people, that we will
I do
figure it
too.
out and continue to work to improve. Because that's what our kids, all of our staff wants, what's the best results possible.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right. So next discussion item, Mrs. Hatfield will be up here for first reading of the 5-year forecast, which is always a great discussion item. And then finally, our next board meeting, we get a little break between, since we moved this one up, we get a little break between now and October 26th.
Great.
All right.
Questions for Mr. Rafe? Thank you, Mr. Rafe. Mrs. Hatfield, Treasurer's Report, please.
Absolutely. So from our report from last week, there's not a lot of change. A couple of things that are going on that I'd like to just give you a general highlight on is that we are currently have the auditor of state is in our department in central office auditing our 2017 financials and going through that process with us thus far. We are working on our gap conversion of our financial information. And the reason we put together a CAFR statement is because we issue debt, because we issue bonds. We put together that generally accepted accounting principle information so that we can report that out and have that in our bond rating information. So we're working through those projects and continue to move forward with our fiscal year. Are there any other questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any public participants?
No.
Okay. Well, with that, we will move then right into the first reading of the 5-year financial forecast. Mrs. Hatfield.
So good evening. We're going to start with the May 2017 projected unencumbered ending cash balances. These were the balances that we provided you with the May 2017 forecast. As we reported on our June financial statements, we ended the 2017 fiscal year pretty close to our target. We were less than 0.2% variance in our revenue. We had more revenue than we anticipated, and we were 0.03% over budget numbers. So overall, very good landing for the fiscal year, right where we thought we would be. So let's talk about our revenue changes from May of 2017. So in fiscal year 18, we have $932,000 increase for where we thought we would be in May of 2017 for this fiscal year. That is made up of the 3 items that you see listed: the general property taxes, state funding, and TIF revenue. Our general property taxes, as we've discussed previously at other board meetings, we have a 2017 tax reappraisal year this year. That tax reappraisal saw a 10% increase in valuations for our community across the community for Olentangy schools. And so it generated about $250,000 increased revenue in general property taxes because we have first half year collections in fiscal 18. And then 19 forward, we'll have a full year collections, which doubles that figure. Our state funding came in right where we had thought it would be in terms of percentage increase. We had predicted about a 5% increase in state funding just for general growth and increased ADM, and it came in at about 5.5 and 5.8%. So not a huge swing in terms of increases, but it does add to that figure that you see. The biggest change would be from our TIF revenue. We had greater than anticipated valuations as we landed 2017, and so that increase in valuations carries forward into fiscal year 18 and beyond. So this is a graph that shows our anticipated revenue by category for fiscal year 18. As you can see from the pie chart, we have approximately 6% that is coming from unrestricted grants and aid, which is a fancy label for state funding. So about 6% of our income is state funding. The rest is taxes. It's local tax dollars. It's tax dollars for real estate, for residential property, and for commercial property. And it makes the majority of our revenue source. So when we look at this, the takeaway that I want the community and our organization to kind of understand and get their hands around is that this is the levy conversation that we continue to have. Our organization relies heavy on local tax money, so it's not a matter of if we ever have to have another levy, it's a matter of when we have to have another levy because we are locally funded.
If you don't have this answer tonight, if you could get it to us when we go over this again, what does the average district look like for this? Because I know we are above average in local taxes, I guess. What percentage is the average district paying in local taxes to the school district? So that we have, because I think that's a good talking point to have.
I apologize.
And then you would just assume that conversely, the percentage of state unrestricted grants and aid, state funding, that piece of the pie would be larger, and their local tax portion would be smaller, I'm assuming.
Right. You would think that it would have the same impact for those districts. I apologize, I don't have that information with me, but we can certainly look into that and report back with the second reading.
Yeah, I think that would be a nice pie chart next to each other. Olentangy and then the average school district, if that information is available.
We have the same risk factors that apply to our revenue sources as we normally do. We have 3 state budgets that affect the 5-year forecast. Of course, the state budgets are on a biennium cycle. They apply to every 2 years. So we are currently influenced by House Bill 49. That budget will last for fiscal year 18 and 19. Then we'll have a new biennium budget for 2021 and then for fiscal year 22 and 23, which is not a part of the forecast. That always has a big impact on us trying to balance out state revenue and looking at what the state may or may not do in terms of funding, which leads again back to the locally funded as a fund source. We always, you hear from community members that are frustrated with tax bills. However, that's the reality that we have at Olentangy. We are locally funded. So we continue to have conversations about what that cycle looks like. For us, we passed our previous levy in 2016. It was passed by more than 58%, which is a really high percentage passage rate. So we're very grateful for our community support. They continue to support the good work and the high-quality education that we provide for our students, and we continue to have that partnership and look forward to continuing that partnership with our community. We are having conversations with legislators about fair funding. We continue to talk about receiving less than what our chartered non-public schools receive per pupil. We discussed that with legislators for this biennium budget, but it didn't make it through to the governor's final proposal for House Bill 49. We appreciate all increases that we get, but again, it's just not enough to keep up with our growth year over year. So for our expenditure summary, in comparison from May of 2017, overall our expenditures increased 1.1 million for fiscal year 18, which is 0.5% increase. That 1.1 million sounds like a very large number, and while we don't make light of it, it is less than 1% increase. The components that are a part of that are personnel services. As you know, when we ended fiscal year 2017, we were over budget in personnel services by 0.8%, largely due to additional staff that we had for intervention and for subs. We have employees' retirement and insurance benefits. That number actually went down slightly for our fiscal year 18. Which is kind of counterintuitive, knowing that we were over budget a little bit with our personnel cost. And the reason that happened is because while retirement benefits did go up, we also were in conversations with our insurance broker about the premium increase that we will see for our renewal rates for effective January 1 of 18. We had assumed 10%, and we think that it's going to be closer to an 8%. We are still deep diving into those metrics and those measures to make sure that that is an effective rate, but we're confident that it won't actually reach that 10%, so we made the adjustment to the October forecast. Our purchase services include our utilities. It includes our substitute teacher costs and other measures. Our purchase services are actually lower than we had anticipated in May. We have some reduced costs in our maintenance and our legal services, and we're anticipating, we've actually seen some reduction in our utility costs due to the energy conservation projects that we have in place now. New to the 5-year forecast is the House Bill 264 principal and interest payments. That's not something that we've previously seen on forecasts. So the House Bill 264 project is a energy conservation project. It was passed as a House bill in 1985, and the gist of the project, just as a general overview for the public who may not have heard about this before or understand how the project works in general. The idea is that the state comes in and allows the district to take unvoted debt on so that we can make changes to our utilities, our lighting, our HVACs, and other systems that control our lighting, heating, and air conditioning to save energy costs, to reduce that footprint on the environment, and then use the savings that we have from our utilities to pay for the unvoted debt. So we started that project in the spring of 2017. We have made an interest payment thus far. We'll have another interest payment within this fiscal year, and then for fiscal year 19 and beyond, we will begin making principal and interest payments. We secured our financing with our local partner, FC Banking, which was formerly Delaware County Bank. We have great opportunities to not only track the savings in utilities because we have the meters in place in-house to do that, but we also have the flexibility in our financing to take the project a step at a time. And if we go through that review process and realize that the savings are not what we had anticipated or we're not satisfied with that, we can choose not to take out the rest of the fund. We have the loan in place for $7.3 million and have 2 tranches set up, so again, we don't have to take on that entire debt. So we continue to enter that phase of tracking. We'll start looking at our meters and tracking those savings in kilowatts used, and continue down that path to have that project be successful. Thus far, we can tell that our kilowatt usage is going down in the buildings where we've changed lighting. We're working on the HVAC controls and getting the testing in place to make sure that that's being realized as well. So at this point, we are pleased in moving forward with those savings. So it seems to be a good project for the district. We're excited to continue the testing process.
So, Emily, so isn't there a timing issue with House Bill 264? So basically, you get a bunch of principal and interest, which is a drag on the forecast, and these savings emerge over time. And so basically, there's probably a net negative impact to the forecast because you're only looking at a 5-year horizon.
Right. There is a lag. Yes, you're correct in that the savings through the utility billing process is behind in terms of when we get billed, when we can see the kilowatt usage, and when the bills will actually decrease. So you're not going to see it all. It's not going to be a tick for tat. You know, you're not going to see this bill go down and then this payment is made. It kind of is a little bit ahead of schedule or off schedule in that regard. However, we also took a very conservative approach with the 5-year forecast in that we did not try to predict or force that level of savings within our purchase service line. We're going to let it naturally go through the forecast as we see those reduced expenditures to help counterbalance some of that risk and minimize the impact that it could be, meaning that we're kind of looking at worst case scenario with no savings at this point. Does that help answer your question?
It does. I mean, my only concern is, you know, when we approved the project,
Mm-hmm.
there were savings that were committed to
Yes.
that aren't in the forecast.
I'm sorry, say that
That are
again.
not in the forecast. Because you took a different approach with the forecast
Mhm.
than necessarily the pro forma of the
Mhm.
House Bill 264 project as it was presented, correct?
Meaning, so with the OFCC approval, they did predict a certain amount of savings, yes, and that savings is guaranteed through heat.
So if they're guaranteed,
Mhm.
why wouldn't you put them in?
My approach to that was that I didn't want us to get to a point in the project if we decided to stop the project that we would be in a bad situation of now we've got it in the forecast, the expenses are there, but we didn't plan for no savings. Will it get better as we go forward? Absolutely. If that's a discussion or an assumption that you would like us to take another look at and change, I'm willing to have that discussion as well.
What I don't want to happen is to take the pressure off of attaining the savings, right? If this sense of relief, we put more conservative assumptions in the forecast. If we miss, it's okay. I mean, we should have the same level of rigor in terms of attaining the savings that we're committed to instead of, in essence, letting the program off the hook.
Absolutely. I don't think it's a management strategy in terms of not holding them accountable. That's not the intent, just more so of being conservative with what our financial situation may be, worst case scenario. But again, I'm more than happy to take another look at that assumption if you'd like us to.
I would expect we'd get regular reporting on the savings,
Mhm.
those compared to what was committed to, if there are any variances.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, what was the net impact? I mean, you can see the 3.2 million of P&I going through the 5 years. How much savings were in there?
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please?
So you can see the 3.2 million of principal and interest
Mhm.
over the 5 years. How much savings are in on the purchase service side?
The project is slated to save about $980,000 annually.
when it gets up to run rate, right? Once all the projects are completed, so during these first 5 years, it's not gonna be.
No.
Correct, and I don't have a way to calculate that accurately at this point. We're starting to track our kilowatt usage at this time. So we have preliminary kilowatt savings to go back and say our kilowatt usage is X or savings is X at this rate. That's one of the reasons why I didn't want to put in a number thus far without being able to test that out.
So really, it's probably $3.2 million hit to the forecast then.
I'm sorry.
It's
Kevin.
probably a $3.2 million hit to the forecast?
Mhm.
Okay. And then in other, where our, not career center, what's the other place that we use for substitutes?
Our other expenditures?
ESC.
Yes.
The increase, it's about, $400,000 to $500,000 per year versus May. How much staff is in there?
So the ESCCO expenditures are occupational therapists, speech therapists, and other sources. We have, I believe, 4 to 5 additional people in there at least. But we've also taken a look at salary structure within that group and keeping and retaining talent within that group or folks in that group that are really helping our students and helping them move forward. As we've talked in previous meetings, we've had SLC growth, we've had preschool growth, we've had a need for those services to be increased. So we took a look at not only just where we are and where we need our students to be and what services they need now, but try to apply that moving forward so that we can maintain that level of service for those students.
So is it 4 to 5 per year, or 4 to 5 in the first year and then 1 or 2 thereafter?
I apologize, I don't have that specific in front of me. I can get back to you on that specific
What
statistic.
I'm trying to get my head around is, over the 5-year forecast, we put about 18 new FTE in, plus whatever's in the ESC line. It's another 4 to 5, so like 23 to 24 more FTE with no change in enrollment.
That 18 added FTE, though, is not taking into consideration that it compounds. So in fiscal year 1, if I hire 4 people, those 4 people carry forward, but they're not 4 additional staff year over year over year,
Right.
so that I don't
By
have
year-
8.
But by year 5, you have 18 more than you had in the last forecast. They come in at 6, like 9, 1, and 3. Comes in a different pattern.
You're counting them twice, though, with counting them to
By year 5,
18.
there's 18 more than you had last time. And that would capture all the compounding.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear
At the end of the day, by year 5, by fiscal 21, there's 18 more than there were when you did fiscal 21 in May. So the 18 captures the compounding.
those additional staff. We added 4 in this fiscal year. We added 1 in the next fiscal year. We actually had a little bit of.
In the ESC line, I'm down in
Okay.
certified classified administrative staff. Net, it's 18 plus the 4 that would be in the ESC line, so you're at like 22 to 23. So I'm trying to get my head around 23 incremental staff with no change in enrollment.
And that's largely in part to our increased special services that we're providing. We're providing additional gifted, we're providing additional intervention specialists. When we have additional intervention specialists and SLC needs, we also have increase in speech and therapy and those ancillary services that come with that. So yes, it doesn't just impact one group or one hiring metric. It impacts several different ranges of services.
And that's based on, I guess you could say, the student population that we foresee, right? Because
Correct.
we've got to know that, okay, we're seeing an increase in students that have these needs, so in the forecast, we've got to put these people in. So when we see an increase in special needs, we may not be adding just one special needs teacher. We might also be adding a speech therapist or a physical therapist. Is that
Correct.
what you're saying?
And an intervention aid if needed.
Oh, yeah.
Depending on the severity and the type of special services that that student may require.
And that's what I'm trying to understand, what's the mix in here? And we can take that offline, but what's the mix of the 18 plus the ESC?
Sure, I'll get you that specific information.
Yes. We could, Todd has all that detailed information, line by line, because he provides all that, building the forecast forward. And the pattern of what's happened in the past, of where we were over at certain grades, K to 5, depending on how the enrollment has shifted. We've been over on intervention specialists the last few years. So there was also a concerted effort to build in what we believe to be more accurate projection of what we think we need moving forward. But those are all broken down by grade level, elementary, middle school, high school, by core classes, by elective classes, by intervention, and then it depends on whether, we don't necessarily, just because we project to use 7 in the future at the elementary level, if we decide we don't need that many, then, but we may have a shift that we need an intervention person somewhere else, we might use it there or so on. So we can show you what we've done with that for the last
Yeah,
2 years.
absolutely.
And then, the Todd is very detailed spreadsheet of that.
And-
Well,
go ahead.
I was saying facilities, we're also looking at what's affecting or need to grow again too is the SLCs and the density of that population, right?
Yeah, and that's, and that's not
And so-
solely, it has really been driven by more of a need for regular intervention specialists is the one that's been the largest area.
That's the
of
largest
growth
one, as
off of
opposed to
what
the
we
S-
had projected in the past.
And while we're on this topic of the breakout of, I guess you would say intervention needs, what is the growth in the gifted area?
Yeah, we haven't, we had made an effort a few years ago, when we added a second gifted intervention specialist at all the middle schools and then
In the
one at the
high
high school level.
school.
And haven't added incrementally two gifted, one additional one at the elementary because there's just been, higher density population, so we'll shift that one extra around if one of the elementaries has
Right, as
significantly
they
more
move
than
up.
others and so on. But we haven't added other gifted in the
Well, I mean,
past
we
two
just had
quarters.
an academic discussion, and it sounds like the only way we can make progress is to add gifted instructors. Tell me if I'm wrong here, but
Right.
we don't have any of those added in, and that would probably,
Oh, no, that'd be about
do
30.
damage to the forecast, right?
Yeah, where there's the ones
you-
where we feel like we have to have them,
Right.
and then the ones we,
Would like to
I'm not
have
willing
if we wanna
spend- I'm not,
show
you know,
progress.
said, I'm not willing to hire 30 staff just to meet the gifted indicator that the state needs us to meet. I think our gifted kids are being served well. There's a difference between whether we
Right.
have to provide gifted services. There's no debate about whether or not we have to provide intervention services, so that's the
Absolutely.
one where, and minutes, serving the number of minutes for specialized instruction, especially in reading, has, significantly impacted our intervention specialists' caseloads. We try to hold at that
Yes.
really tight ratio of 16. And again, Todd and the Pupil Services team have looked at what those ratios are, where we are with them, and trying to accurately plan forward.
Well, I guess my point is, we're not going to try to buy an A.
No,
Right.
not for the gift.
Not in the current,
not for the
well,
Right.
certainly not in the current
Right,
funding
no,
model that we're-
the way things are with the state report card, that's what it comes down to.
That-
Yeah.
That's a different conversation than the intervention conversation.
Absolutely, but if you're going to have the intervention conversation, we also need to say, we're not adding any, at the gifted level.
Well, and as we know that obviously staffing is our biggest expense, and staying as tight on staffing as possible is our goal to adequately meet the needs of the district, so.
I mean, I'm all for keeping a watch on our student-teacher ratio in order to control costs, but I also don't want to jeopardize the learning of our students, whether they be gifted or they need special interventions.
Correct. And
And
we'll
that's
get
what-
more into that pupil-teacher ratio in just a couple of slides to kind of get you some more information about that as well. With that, we're going to move on with the overall expenditures by category. I apologize, the slide actually says FY17. That should reflect FY18. I apologize for the typing error on that. But at the end of the day, the dollar amount is reflective of our fiscal year 18 expenditures by category. You can see the personnel services and retirement and insurance, of course, are the largest components of our expenditures, as we are a service industry. What we provide to our students is teaching staff and services. This follows that model by and large. Our purchase services, again, include utilities and our legal services and substitute teachers. Supplies and materials are where we're going to see our textbooks and some of our technology expenditures. Our capital outlay continues to remain very low. We are very fortunate to have a permanent improvement levy and to have a passed bond, no new millage bond in 2016, and so that continues to help us keep that pressure of capital outlay off of the general fund, which is great. Our other objects then include our ESCCO, contracted services for preschool and specialized services, and then treasurer and auditor collection fees for taxes, auditor fees to review our financials, bank fees, etc. So risks for our expenditures. Of course, one of the items that we continue to discuss is the completion of Berlin High School. Jeff has been giving the board updated reports, and we are on target and on time with that, which is great. So we don't anticipate that there will be any changes. However, it is a risk. And so we continue to track that and monitor that and keep that in the forefront while the project is being finished. Enrollment projections are an expenditure risk. We use our enrollment projections to make hiring decisions and to talk about capacity issues. And so those are numbers that we watch on a regular basis. Changing in staff assumptions, meaning, being driven by the enrollment projection, the changing in staff assumptions, as we see with our SLC changes, can have an impact on the 5-year forecast and what hits our personnel and insurance and benefits lines. Our union negotiations also play a role in this as we talk to our staff and negotiate pupil-teacher ratio, classroom ratios, as we talk about wages and we talk about insurance and other benefits. Those are impacted through that negotiation process. Our insurance expense is a risk that almost any entity face. However, because we are self-funded, we do see that impact us directly as we pay our own claims. Our insurance committee is very active in putting together an education plan. We have some items that we've already rolled out, and we are continuing to put together materials that'll help educate the staff on how their spending habits or usage of the plan affects the spending of the plan, how to save them money and how to save the district money and have that partnership continue to be enhanced. And then we continue to look at plan information. Utility and fuel costs also are expenditure risks. We've talked about our utility usage going down in just a general overall energy conservation project that Jeff's department has implemented, I believe, in 2013. We've really seen some savings there, and he continues to report on that for you. And our fuel costs change as with economics change. It's an anomaly that's hard to peg down. And so it becomes one of those items that we continue to look at and monitor frequently. Our House Bill 264 project cost versus savings, of course, we're monitoring that process and continue to look at our kilowatt usage. and talk about the impact of what those changes are doing for our district. And we'll continue to report out on that as we get more information gathered. And then, of course, our Educational Service Center expenditures, or ESCCO. Those expenditures are discussing, as we've already mentioned, our preschool and specialized services for therapists, and so forth. So our enrollment trend. Again, one of the major components of our forecast is looking at our enrollment trend and understanding the dynamic of our growth. We are an ever-growing district. Each year we continue to see our ADM grow by 500 or more students. This chart represents our actuals through fiscal year 18 and our expected in fiscal year 19 through 22. The expected numbers are based upon last November's reporting. So each November we have our enrollment report that comes from FutureThink. They present to the board and the board takes action to approve those numbers. So this is still based on that 2016 report. We will have a new report available in November, which we will factor into the May forecast. Our pupil-teacher ratios. As we discussed in a few moments ago, as we were talking about our pupil-teacher ratio and that metric that we have in our CIP goals. Our CIP goal is currently set at 15.5. It's one of the metrics that we use to understand how we're doing and being fiscally responsible with our hiring components. As you can see in fiscal year 18, we are meeting that metric at 15.67. Fiscal years 19 through 22, we are just under that metric. That metric is driven down in fiscal year 19, of course, is opening Berlin High School. That's going to have an impact as we add those teachers and those services or those positions that are maybe not a classroom full of students, right? So they are reducing or watering down, so to speak, that average. But happy that that number is trending straight. It's leveling out and starting to come back up. So we are monitoring the progress of our hiring and the needs of our staff, or needs of our students, and planning accordingly. Revenue versus expenditures. This is a representation of line 6.01 in the 5-year forecast. As you can see in this graph, in fiscal year 19, we begin spending more than our revenue sources are coming in. Part of this is the general cycle and how we are funded. So if we think about our state funding, right, it doesn't grow at the same amount as our ADM grows. It doesn't keep up with our exponential growth as we are underfunded by the state. In addition, we have the effects of House Bill 920, which doesn't allow our outside millage to collect more than the dollar amount originally stated in the vote as it was voted by the public. So in general, schools are going to see that eventually their revenue is not going to keep up with their expenditures. There's going to be a time where the levy cycle picks back up for us, and this demonstrates that fact as we look at our expenditures versus revenue cycle. So our projected unencumbered ending balances, as you can see by the chart in fiscal year 22, we have a day's cash balance, or an estimated day cash balance. In fiscal year 21, we have an estimated 45 days cash balance, and previously in May, we were at about 48 days. So you can see the difference in the cash balances. They're not a huge swing. I think it's the dynamic of taking fiscal year 16, and 17 off. You don't see the rise from collections of the current operating levy that was passed for 2016 and then it ebbing off. You just see the downward trend for that. Are there further questions about the 5-year forecast?
I have a lot. So if someone wants to go first.
No, you can go if you have a lot.
Okay, she has a lot. Okay.
Um,
What can I answer for you, Julie?
Just throwing it out there, for the press that is in the room. If we got what private schools got in 2019, fiscal year 2019, that would be 15.8 million more in revenue. And that's based on private schools getting $1,267 per pupil. And then in the last year, the forecast, if we got what private schools got, we would get 16.3 million more in fiscal year '22. So just putting that out there. But now on to my questions.
Okay.
You have you just showed us the chart on the days of cash on hand. And so can you tell the public what is good to have? Like, okay, you've got 1 day's cash on hand, at least you're not negative, so what financially is good to have on hand?
That's a very valid point. Those numbers are very large numbers. To the public eye, $72 million is an extremely large number. But when you put it in the relevance of what we spend and what our annual spend is, it equates to about 122 days. So when we get into fiscal year 21, we're looking at about 45 days cash balance. That's about a month and a half. General practice is 1 to 2 months cash balance. So in fiscal year 21, we are at that point where we probably should have been in I would think that a levy cycle would hit probably in 20 to collect in 21.
You just answered one of my questions. Going back to expenses, how is the self-insurance program working? Can you compare, any savings or any increase in cost compared to where we were before we went self-insured? Has that been a true savings for the district?
Well, we initially saved $2 million just within state fees and costs that the administration of the insurance program in and of itself, and all the Affordable Care Act fees and things that apply to a fully funded organization or program versus self-insured. We have seen an average of the first year that we went self-insured, we had a 0% increase in premium. In the second year that we were self-insured, we had a 4% increase. And last year, we saw an 8% increase. We know from market trends that we've seen folks get hit with anything from a 15 to a 22% increase in premiums due to utilization of the plan. So, we are using, I don't know that it's slowing down market trend. Market is going to continue to increase that cost. There's no one particular trigger that can stop that, but what we can do is slow it down and manage it. I think that slowdown is happening, but we have room for growth and measures to get better or to make improvements. And I think that we're looking at that with the insurance committee and our staff. In terms of dollars, we have the initial savings that we have documented. I don't have specific statistics on the out years for you at this point, but I can look into that.
And what's the status of the insurance committee?
So with the insurance committee, we have looked at, we've looked at how do we teach or how do we educate our staff on the impact we have on our program. We're talking about shopping services, for example. If you have an MRI that you need, you don't have to go to one particular place. You can get online, you can look at your MyCare Compare, you can get the lowest cost provider. And there's a pretty big difference. It could be anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000 service, depending on where you go. So we're educating staff that exists. I don't know, that everybody not everyone is an expert on health insurance, so we're educating on those pieces. We're educating on what it means to be self-insured, that the district is in fact paying the claims. And we're looking at comparable districts, plans and designs, and what's included in those, and how are they looking at packages to really try to educate ourselves and the staff on, what's market.
So, I guess to Julie's point, when will the committee's work be complete?
I'm sorry?
When will the committee's work be complete? When will the committee come forward with like a recommendation?
We are looking at some more numbers in October. I don't have a specific date beyond that to say that we'll have a definitive recommendation. We don't have another meeting, we don't have another specific date set, but we do intend to continue that work and work beyond that October date to come forward with a recommendation. So we,
Until you anchor it with a date, you can analyze the heck out of it. Until you set that date to deliver a recommendation, the work will expand to the time allotted. So you probably should just set a date.
absolutely, we'll move forward with that. Julie, did you have further questions?
Yeah, you've answered some of them in your answers, so.
Okay, thank you.
Can you go back to your expenditure risk slide? This one.
Yes.
So, I mean, I see that some of them are inherently higher risk than others. Have you taken a look at these, or do you look at these in terms of, are there any that you can mitigate and push off or out of a risk position by either changing your business practice, approach, anything like that? I mean, the high school project's going to run and it's going to end, right? Enrollment projections, we can't affect that. They are what they are. Your union negotiations and insurance expense to the insurance committee are probably your higher, but is there anything on there that you can, I mean, do you look at your risk in terms of that, of something you can say, if we dedicated X to that, we could mitigate that? I mean, an ESC expenditure by changing how you do business, or, I mean, House Bill 264, to Mr. O'Brien's point, at some point you'll have an off-ramp where you're going to have to decide we're either staying on or we're getting off.
Absolutely.
But, I mean, do you look at it that way and when you have these discussions and you're prepped for the forecast?
Oh, absolutely. They aren't, it's not just giving a reported number, it's practice. It's how do we look at this? What are we doing? How do these align with our strategic goals? What are the areas that we can put work plans in place with this to align with our strategic goals to help mitigate, reduce, change information or assumptions that we currently have? These items, I believe, at some point or in some way will always be risks. Now, we can minimize that and take the weighting out of some of that, to your point. But at the end of the day, they're services that we always use. We're always going to have enrollment changes. We're always going to need ESE services to help us provide those therapists and things of that nature that we don't have access to otherwise. So yes, we do look at our hiring practices. We do look at our operational practices as we go through these numbers and make adjustments and changes to make it better.
Yeah, it's probably not a fair question, but I'm just wondering if you're thinking in terms of that. I mean, we're in a 5-year strategic plan process. That's kind of a natural it's part of that natural process you go through of looking at risks and risk factors.
Absolutely, absolutely. And when we tie this to, our strategic planning and our goals and our operational items, now we get a complete picture. And we can see what we have the impact on, and the impact can be then reflected not only in the updates that we give with our strategic planning updates, but also be reflected within the 5-year forecast assumptions as we continue to move forward. Some of the assumptions in this document change before we can even print it. It's a live document. There are things that impact it that change moments after I make the assumption and put it on paper. So we're constantly aware of that and taking that into consideration and tracking it and moving forward and keeping our hands around it as a leadership team. Absolutely.
Well, into that point, one of the risks that's not on that screen is mandates. Like you just never know what's around the
Right.
corner, and that we're going to have, I mean, look at what we just have to do with gifted, 30 hours per teacher, you know.
Right.
That would affect the ESC line, but
Yes, it would affect the ESC line, and we talked about what would happen if we hired to the gifted standard, so that we didn't have that line item on the report card. We've talked about that. So you're absolutely right. There are mandates that change, and we consider those when we talk about staffing and things of that nature.
Other questions for Ms. Satfield? Thank you.
Question? Thank you.
So with that, Ms. Satfield, do we have any other public participation, folks, for session 2?
No, we do not.
We'll move into superintendent action items, I believe. Mr. Rafe, if you would present superintendent action items, including the addendum.
Yes, sir. I'd like to present superintendent action items A through C for approval.
So moved.
A second.
Any discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Feasel?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
yes.
And Mr. Bartz?
Yes. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Any closing comments? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Mrs. Feasel?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien? And Mr. Bartz?
Yes. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Have a safe drive home.